Imagine 4 kilometers of ice overhead. Temperature, -89 degrees. The polar night lasts 4 months. You are at the most inaccessible point on the planet, where no human foot has stepped for millions of years. And suddenly, the instruments show the impossible. Beneath the thickness of eternal ice lies something that shouldn't exist, according to all laws of nature and history. This story began in the midst of the Cold War, when two superpowers competed not only in space, but also in the most remote corners of the Earth. Officially, for the sake of science. But what if beneath the cover of scientific research, something greater was hidden? What if Soviet polar explorers found in Antarctica something that humanity was not supposed to know about? 60 years have passed. Thousands of documents have been declassified. Witnesses have appeared who finally dared to speak. And the picture that emerges from fragments of information amazes even the most skeptical researchers. What you will read now is based on real events, documentary evidence, and recollections of participants in those events. But where the archives are silent, where pages are torn out and files are still classified, that's where our story begins. On December 16, 1957, a Li-2 plane with red stars on its wings appeared in the sky over Antarctica. On board was the first shift of winterers from the Soviet Antarctic expedition. Officially, their task was to build a scientific station as part of the International Geophysical Year, an unprecedented project that united scientists from 67 countries. The expedition commander, polar explorer Alexei Treshnikov, looked out the window at the endless white desert under the ice. In his worn field tablet lay a map with precise coordinates: 78 degrees 28 south latitude, 106 degrees 48 east longitude, the geomagnetic pole of the southern hemisphere, eastern, the coldest place on the planet. But in the secret compartment of the tablet was stored another document, sealed 7 times with a stamp of top secret of special importance. The coordinates matched to the minute, only the justification for choosing the location was completely different. The Vostok Station began to be built under conditions that are hard for a modern person to imagine. The temperature dropped to -70. The wind tore down tents. Equipment failed from the cold. But the Soviet polar explorers worked with persistence that could be explained by only one thing. They knew that here, at this very point, something extremely important was hidden. The official version stated, "The station was created to study the climate, the Earth's magnetic field, the upper layers of the atmosphere. The international scientific community welcomed the Soviet initiative. The Americans built their base at the South Pole, the French on the coast. The British settled on the Antarctic Peninsula. The French. It seemed that a new era of peaceful development of the last unexplored continent had begun. However, in the depths of the Soviet state security apparatus, they knew that the choice of location for the Vostok Station was not random. And also, in 1946, right after the war, trophy German documents fell into the hands of Soviet intelligence. Among them were materials from the mysterious Nazi expedition to Antarctica in 1938-39. The Germans called their Antarctic territory New Swabia and claimed they were conducting cartographic work there. But in the captured papers, Soviet specialists discovered strange notes about geophysical anomalies in the magnetic pole area and signs of subglacial voids of significant volume. For 10 years, these documents gathered dust in the archives. But in the 56th year, when the world was preparing for the International Geophysical Year, someone in the high offices remembered the German finds. A special commission was created, an examination was conducted, and a decision was made. The USSR must secure this point ahead of others. The first winter at Vostok turned out to be harsh even by Antarctic standards. The thermometer showed -83 degrees, a temperature at which one can stay outside in the frost for no more than a few minutes. The 12 members of the wintering shift lived in wooden houses, lined inside with plywood and insulated with everything that could be found. But at the same time, the station was equipped with instruments that were nowhere else in Antarctica. Seismographs of special sensitivity, gravimeters of the latest model, an installation for radar ice sounding, a technology that was just beginning to be applied in glaciology. Andrei Kapitsa, a young glaciologist from the Leningrad expedition, was the first to notice the anomaly. In the winter of '59, he was conducting ice thickness measurements using seismic sounding. The results were stunning. Under the station, the ice reached almost 4 kilometers. Stunning, but the main thing was something else. Comrade Treshnikov approached the station chief late on a polar evening. "Look at this data. Right under us, a huge void. I've counted at least 250 kilometers in length and 50 in width." Treshnikov studied the seismograms, then took a secret folder from the safe and long compared the figures. Finally, he said, "A lake. A subglacial lake, sealed under a 4-kilometer shell for millions of years." He paused, then added quieter, "Exactly what they were looking for." "Who are they?" Kapitsa didn't understand. Treshnikov didn't answer. He wrote an encrypted radiogram to Moscow, in which he reported, "Object discovered. Parameters exceed expectations. Ready for the next stage." The response came in 3 days. "Continue observation. Arrival of a special group is planned for the spring of '60. Until their arrival, not a word to anyone." But Kapitsa couldn't stay silent. The discovery was too important for science. A subglacial lake of this size was a real sensation.
He wrote an article and sent it to a scientific journal. The publication came out at the beginning of '61 and caused a furor in the scientific world. Only about what happened at Vostok Station in the interval between the discovery and the publication, Kapitsa preferred not to talk until the end of his days. When he was asked about this period, he would look away and say, "There were things that science couldn't explain." In any case, the science of that time, and to the question of why the station was built exactly in this point, the old polar explorer smiled slyly. Coincidence. In such a matter, there are no coincidences. Someone knew in advance what we would find there. In the spring of 1960, a group of 8 people approached the Vostok Station on heavy all-terrain vehicles. They were not listed in any official expedition lists. Their leader was Colonel of the State Security Committee Viktor Samsonov, a man with an impenetrable face and very attentive eyes. The group brought with them containers with equipment, on which there were seals of closed defense institutes, and also a strict order to allocate a separate room for them, not to ask questions, and to immediately report any unusual instrument readings. It was with their arrival at Vostok that the real operation began, an operation that was destined to change the understanding of the past of our planet, if, of course, the world ever learned the truth. In Moscow, in the massive building on Lubyanskaya Square, there was a department about which even many employees of the State Security Committee itself did not know. Officially, it was called Department S of the First Main Directorate, and was engaged, according to the staffing table, in special research in the field of geology and geography. In fact, Department S was created in 1959 by personal order of the KGB chairman Alexander Shalypin to work on one single project. This project received the codename Northern Lights. Despite the fact that the action was unfolding on the opposite pole of the planet, Colonel Viktor Samsonov, a man with an unusual biography, was appointed head of the department. Before joining the organs, he worked as a geophysicist, participated in the search for uranium deposits in Chukotka, then, for incomprehensible reasons, transferred to service in state security structures. It was said that, during the expedition in Chukotka, his group stumbled upon something strange, after which Samsonov was called to Moscow and offered a completely different job. The selection of employees was approached meticulously. Not just qualified specialists were required, people who could keep a secret. Physically resilient and psychologically stable were needed. Everyone was checked along all lines: biography, political reliability, strength of family ties. Out of 200 candidates, 15 were selected.
The group included 2 glaciologists, specialists in ice and glaciers, a geophysicist who previously worked on a secret facility searching for underground bunkers, a microbiologist in case traces of ancient life were found under the ice, 2 drilling engineers who had experience in deep drilling at Siberian oil fields, a radio technician specializing in long-range communications and non-standard signals, and 8 more people whose specialties did not appear in any documents. Training took place at a closed base near Moscow for 3 months, from December 59 to February 60. They were taught to work in the cold, to drill ice, to handle unique equipment that was being developed specifically for this operation. But the strangest were the theoretical classes. They were given lectures on ancient civilizations, shown photographs of mysterious archaeological finds, told about theories that official science considered heresy. Samsonov himself often lectured. "Science, comrades," he said, standing at the board with a map of Antarctica.
You must be prepared to find things there that contradict everything you were taught in universities. The history of the planet may turn out to be completely different from what we are used to thinking. And our task is not to make hasty conclusions, but to record facts. All facts, no matter how incredible they may seem. One of the training participants, glaciologist Pavel Gorelov, years later recounted, "We were preparing for a meeting with the unknown." That's exactly what it was called. Protocol for Contact with the Unknown. We were explained how to act if we found artifacts of unknown origin, how to document them, pack them, transport them. There was even an instruction for cases. He fell silent. In case these artifacts turned out to be not ancient, but operational. Equipment for the expedition began to be prepared even earlier, from the summer of '59. In the design bureaus, they worked on creating a drill capable of penetrating through a multi-kilometer thickness of ice. The task was not an easy one. Ordinary drilling rigs were not suitable for such depths. Nikolai Vasilyev, an engineer from the Leningrad Mining Institute, was appointed chief designer. He was given virtually unlimited funding and access to any materials and technologies. The only condition, absolute secrecy. Vasilyev created a thermal drill, an installation that melted the ice with a hot bit, while simultaneously flushing the well with a special solution. For those times, it was a real breakthrough. But the most interesting thing was hidden in the additional equipment. Sensors capable of registering the slightest changes in the ice structure. Foreign inclusions, voids, were built into the drilling head. "We must know what's down there even before we reach the bottom," Vasilyev explained to his team. "If there's really something there, we can't afford to blindly crash into it." The cargo was sent on the icebreaker Ob, the flagship of the Soviet Antarctic Fleet. The ship's captain, Ilya Burlakov, received a sealed order. Deliver a special cargo to Vostok Station and ensure its unloading with observance of a special secrecy regime. Burlakov was an experienced polar explorer who had sailed in northern latitudes for many years. He had seen all sorts. But when 20 containers stamped top secret were loaded on board under armed escort, even he felt that there was something unusual about this voyage. The Ob left Leningrad port on November 23, 1959. Officially another voyage of the Antarctic expedition, with cargo delivery and replacement of the scientific staff. But among the passengers were 8 people who did not communicate with the others, spent time in a separate cabin, and clearly were not ordinary polar explorers. The journey to Antarctica took 40 days. The icebreaker went through the Atlantic, rounded Africa, crossed the Indian Ocean. The route passed through January 1, 1960. The Ob dropped anchor off the coast of Antarctica in the area of Mirny Station. Here began the most difficult part of the journey. To Vostok, 1,400 kilometers across the ice plateau. A road that was covered on heavy-tracked tractors took weeks and was deadly dangerous. Temperature, cracks in the ice, whiteout fog. The polar explorers knew that every such trip could be the last. The cargo was divided into parts. The main equipment was transported on sledges.
the most valuable and secret in special heated containers. Samsonov's group rode ahead on all-terrain vehicles, not allowing even the tractor drivers near the secret cargo. They followed the route laid out by previous expeditions. Endless white plain around, cold -50, wind from which no clothing could protect. 20 kilometers per day. Good speed under such conditions, so the path to Vostok would take about 2 months. Under their conditions, in the expedition chief's diary, there is an entry from February 15th, 1960. We have covered half the way. People are holding up well. Equipment is working.
But Samsonov and his group are becoming increasingly tense as they approach the goal. They know something important, and that something scares even them. And in Samsonov's own personal diary, which would be discovered only half a century after his death, there are such lines. The closer we get to the station, the stronger the feeling that we are moving toward something bigger than just a scientific discovery, as if Antarctica itself is waiting for us, waiting to reveal the secret it has kept for millions of years. They arrived at Vostok on March 3rd. Ahead was the polar night, months of absolute darkness when the station was completely cut off from the outside world, the most suitable time for secret work. Samsonov and his group occupied a separate barrack, surrounded it with an additional fence, installed their own radio station with encrypted communication directly to Moscow, installed it, and began drilling. But in the very first days, something happened that made them doubt whether they were ready for what they would find in the depths. At a depth of 300 meters, the drilling head recorded a strange signal. Short, but clear. Like a response. Like something down there responding to their presence. Samsonov himself went up to the surface with the recording of this signal. He listened to it in headphones over and over for a long time, then wrote an encrypted message to Moscow. Anomalous signal recorded. Nature unclear. Continuing work. And added by hand at the bottom of the sheet, in handwriting that betrayed agitation. There is something there. Something alive. The polar winter at Vostok turns the station into a small island of life amid absolute darkness and cold. The temperature drops below -80. Going outside without special equipment is certain death in a matter of minutes. The 20 members of the wintering staff live in the confined space of wooden barracks, lit by the dim light of diesel generators. The winter of 1960 was special. Besides the usual polar routine, meteorological observations, scientific measurements, and the struggle for survival in inhuman conditions, the drilling rig operated around the clock at the station. Samsonov's group was drilling the well, officially named Vostok 1. By early June, the well depth had reached 1,200 meters. The work progressed slowly. At such a depth, the ice became dense, like stone. Drilling bits overheated to high temperatures had to be changed every day. But Samsonov drove the people mercilessly. He knew what the others didn't. Time was against them. On the night of June 5th, the station's radio operator, Sergei Morozov, noticed something strange. He was conducting a communication session with Mirny, the usual transmission of the weather summary, when an incomprehensible noise appeared in the headphones. Not atmospheric interference, nor the whistle of the aurora, which he had long learned to distinguish. Something else. It was like a rhythm, he recounted later. No, as if someone is constantly knocking on the door. Knock, knock. Pause. Knock, knock, knock. Pause. And so on, for about 15 minutes, until I switched the frequency. Morozov reported to the station chief, who shrugged. Who knows what kind of interference there is at the pole? But when Samsonov learned about it, he rushed to the radio room looking as if something extraordinary had happened. Recorded? He blurted out from the doorway. No, Comrade Colonel, should I have? Immediately tune to the same frequency and turn on recording if the interference repeats. It repeated that same night, exactly at 2:30 local time. Morozov recorded the signal on magnetic tape.
When they listened to the recording in the morning, those present exchanged glances. The rhythm was too regular to be random, too ordered to be a natural phenomenon. Samsonov took the tape and locked himself in his barrack. An hour later, he called the radio technician from his group, Vladimir Kretov, a man with golden hands and absolute pitch.
Vladimir, listen. Samsonov handed in the headphones. And tell me what this could be. Kretov listened for a long time, rewinding the tape back and forth, making some notes. Finally, he took off the headphones. Code, Comrade Colonel. This is definitely code. Not Morse code. I would have recognized it immediately, but the structure is similar. Short and long pulses, pauses of different durations. There's a system. I can feel it. Only we don't have the key to decipher it, and the direction from which the signal is coming. That's what's strange. Kretov shook his head. The antenna is pointed upward, to the ionosphere. We're catching a reflected signal, but the source, he hesitated. The source seems to be somewhere here, close, maybe even under us. Samsonov nodded, as if expecting such an answer. Continue monitoring the airwaves, record everything, and not a word to the others. That same night, the instrument readings began that didn't fit into any scientific framework. Seismographs recorded microvibrations coming not from above, as happens during earthquakes, but from below. Gravimeters showed anomalies in the gravitational field, as if under the station, at a depth of several kilometers, something was distorting the very structure of space. Geophysicist from Samsonov's group Dmitry Volkov checked the instruments 3 times before daring to report. Comrade Colonel, either all our instruments have gone mad at the same time, or, he swallowed, or something is happening down there that can't be according to the laws of physics. More specifically, a large-scale gravitational anomaly. As if at a depth of 3 to 4 kilometers, there is a huge cavity, or object, with density that strongly differs from the density of ice. A large cavity. We know about the lake. This is not the lake, Comrade Colonel. Water would give different readings. This is something solid, and extended for kilometers. Samsonov looked at the instrument graphs for a long time, then took out a topographic map from the safe with seismic-sounding results plotted on it and began comparing the data. What emerged from the comparison made even him, a man who had seen much, tense up. Beneath the thickness of ice at a depth of about 3,800 meters lay Lake Vostok. This had been known for several years, but new data showed, under the layer of water at the bottom of the lake, there was something else. Structures of regular geometric shapes extending for tens of kilometers. This is not a natural formation, Volkov exhaled. This is a structure. The message to Moscow Samsonov sent in a cipher of special importance. Artificial origin objects discovered. Nature unclear. Age presumably pre-glacial. Consultation with specialists required. Continuing drilling. The response came in a day, signed by Shalepin himself. Increase secrecy regime. Do not allow outsiders to the works. Deliver ice core sample from maximum depth to Moscow on the first flight. By mid-July, the well depth reached 2,000 meters. Every 100 meters they raised an ice core, a cylinder of ice extracted from the well. From it, scientists could read the history of the climate like pages of a book. Layer by layer, year by year, millennium by millennium. But at a depth of 1,950 meters, something happened that made them stop drilling. When they raised the next core and placed it on the table for examination, microbiologist Anna Soboleva noticed a dark dot in the thickness of the transparent ice. Tiny, less than a millimeter. Under the microscope, the dark dot turned out to be an inclusion. Metallic, perfectly round in shape. This is impossible, Soboleva murmured, refocusing the microscope again and again. At this depth, the ice is about 400,000 years old. How could metal end up here? And of regular shape at that? She cut out fragments of ice with the inclusion and placed them under a more powerful microscope. What revealed itself upon magnification didn't fit in the head. The metallic particle had a structure that was not chaotic, but ordered, like a tiny detail of some mechanism. Samsonov ordered a full analysis. The sample was melted, the particle extracted, and examined by all available methods.
The results were contradictory. Spectral analysis showed an alloy of several metals, including titanium, very pure, of high quality. Age? Age cannot be determined, reported chemist Igor Belov. That is, it can be determined, but this thing is simultaneously older and younger than the ice in which we found it. This is absurd. I understand, but that's the data. Explain it simpler, Samsonov asked. The metal was smelted using technologies that Belov hesitated, which surpass ours in degree of purity. In the structure of the crystal lattice, and radiometric analysis gives an age of hundreds of thousands of years. But that's impossible. Metal can't be that ancient and technologically advanced at the same time. Smelting of such quality requires modern, if not more advanced, technologies. Silence hung in the barrack. Everyone understood they had stumbled upon something that shouldn't exist, evidence of an advanced civilization hundreds of thousands of years ago, when, according to official science, people were only learning to chip stones for primitive tools. Samsonov wrote a new cipher message. Artifacts of technological origin discovered. Age presumably 400,000 years. This changes everything. Awaiting instructions. Moscow replied within a few hours, and for the first time during the entire expedition, the radio operator's voice trembled as he read the decrypted message. Suspend drilling. Conserve all samples. Arrival of a commission from Moscow is planned in 2 weeks. But stopping was already impossible. That same night, July 8th, radio signals with unknown code resumed, only now they were stronger, clearer, and if you listen closely, a pattern could be discerned in them.
A pattern that changed, as if someone was trying to establish contact, selecting a language of communication. Changed, as if. And at a depth of 2,000 meters, the drilling head unexpectedly fell into a void. A small one, only about a meter high, but it was not a natural crack in the ice. It was a cavity, a chamber with even walls, which upon closer inspection turned out not to be icy, but stone, processed, polished. And in the center of this chamber, embedded in the ice, lay a slab with writings, symbols that belonged to no known script. On July 23, 1960, a special IL-14 plane landed at an airfield near Moscow. From it emerged Colonel Viktor Samsonov, thin, bearded, with eyes red from insomnia. In his hands was a small container, sealed and wrapped in chains, as if something extremely dangerous was stored inside. An hour later, he was already sitting in an office on Lubyanka, where the highest ranks of Soviet intelligence and representatives of the Academy of Sciences had gathered. KGB chairman Alexander Shalypin personally chaired the meeting. Next to him was the deputy chairman of the Council of Ministers, overseeing the defense industry, and 3 academicians hastily summoned from scientific institutes. Samsonov placed the container on the table. Comrades, what I brought from Antarctica will force us to reconsider our understanding of the history of civilization, he began, without preliminaries. At a depth of 2,000 meters, in a layer of ice about 400,000 years old, we discovered an artificial chamber with processed walls and artifacts that should not be there. He opened the container. Inside, on a velvet lining, lay 3 items. A metal shard the size of a coin, a fragment of a stone slab with incomprehensible symbols, and a tiny sphere, perfectly smooth, gleaming with a dull metallic sheen. The metallic fragment, Samsonov pointed to the first item, an alloy of titanium with impurities unknown to us. The processing precision surpasses everything we can do in our factories.
Purity.
Age, according to radiometric analysis conducted on site, from 300 to 500,000 years. A tense silence hung in the office. "Colonel, do you realize what you're saying?" One of the academicians spoke up, a gray-haired man in glasses. 300,000 years ago on Earth, not only metal processing technologies did not exist, but Homo sapiens in the modern sense did not exist either. "I understand perfectly, comrade academician. That's exactly why I'm here." Samsonov picked up the stone fragment. "This is part of the slab we found in the same chamber. Writings, pictograms. Our specialist could not identify the language. It resembles neither Sumerian cuneiform, nor Egyptian hieroglyphs, nor any known ancient script." The academicians leaned over the table, examining the symbols. Indeed, the inscriptions were strange, angular, but elegant, as if combining geometric precision with artistic expressiveness. "And this," Samsonov lifted the sphere, "we found it in the center of the slab. It lay in a recess as if placed there specially. Diameter exactly 3 centimeters. Weight 123 grams. Material," he paused. "The material defies identification. It doesn't magnetize, doesn't conduct electricity. At the same time, the temperature of its surface is always 2 degrees higher than the ambient environment, as if there's a heat source inside." "This is impossible," one of those present exhaled. "Nevertheless, it is so," Samsonov replied firmly. "And that's not all." He took a folder with graphs from his briefcase. "Radio signals. We've been recording them for a month already. Regular, repeating, with a certain structure. The source is under us, at a depth of 3 to 4 kilometers." Shalypin took the folder, leafed through the graphs, and passed it to the radio technician specialist from his apparatus. "Your opinion, briefly," the chairman asked. The specialist studied the documents for 10 minutes, scribbling something on paper, shaking his head. "That's code," he finally said. Undoubtedly primitive in structure, but clearly carrying information. Moreover, he raised his eyes to Shalypin. "It's changing, as if adapting, trying to establish contact." "With whom?" the deputy chairman of the Council of Ministers asked sharply. "Do you mean to say that under 4 kilometers of ice there's someone alive?" "I'm only speaking about facts," the specialist replied cautiously. "And the facts are, the signal source is reacting to our presence. When we start drilling, the activity increases. When we stop, it quiets down. This is not a natural phenomenon. This is interaction." Shalypin leaned back in his chair, lit a cigarette, stared out the window for a long time where grey Moscow roofs were visible beyond the glass. "Comrade Samsonov," he finally said, "if what you suggest turns out to be true, if under the Antarctic ice there are indeed traces of a civilization that existed hundreds of thousands of years ago, this will change the understanding of all human history. The question: are we ready for such knowledge? Is the world ready? Humanity?" "Comrade Chairman," Samsonov leaned forward, "we cannot stop. The Americans will sooner or later start their research in this region. The Germans knew something even before the war. Otherwise, why did they need the expedition of '38? If there are really technologies there, knowledge of an ancient civilization, whoever gets access to them first will gain an advantage that cannot be assessed." "You are thinking about military application?" "I'm thinking about everything. About science, about technologies, about how knowledge of the past can give us keys to the future." Samsonov stood up and paced the office. "We found an alloy that we cannot reproduce. A source of energy whose principle of operation we do not know. A script that we cannot read. And all this only at a depth of 2,000 meters. And under us there are still 2,000 meters. And the lake, and what lies at its bottom." A long silence. Finally, Shalypin nodded. "Continue the work, but with conditions. First, complete secrecy. Not a single word even to allies in the socialist camp. Complete.
Second, expand the group of specialists. We need linguists, archaeologists, experts on ancient civilizations. Third, he looked at the academicians. Create a scientific group here in Moscow to analyze the samples. And fourth, he stubbed out the cigarette. Develop protocols in case we encounter something active, alive, intelligent. The meeting continued for another 3 hours. They discussed details, logistics, risks. Samsonov reported specifics, answered questions, showed photographs and diagrams. When everyone dispersed, the KGB chairman detained the colonel. "Viktor Alexeyevich, tell me honestly, just to me, what do you really think? What's down there?" Samsonov was silent for a long time, choosing his words. "I think, Comrade Chairman, that Antarctica was not always covered in ice. That a very long time ago it was an ordinary continent, with a climate, with life, and possibly with a civilization. A highly developed civilization that perished as a result of a catastrophe. An ice age or something else. And they knew that the catastrophe was coming. That's why they left a time capsule. A message, warnings, I don't know exactly, but something very important. And these signals, do you really think there could be something operational there? I've seen those instrument readings, Comrade Chairman. I've heard those signals. And I know one thing. Either this is the most grandiose natural phenomenon that science cannot explain, or," he swallowed, "or we're not alone in this story. Or they left there not just a monument, but something more. A system. A mechanism. Perhaps even a guardian." Shilipin nodded. "Return to the station with a new group of specialists and continue drilling, but carefully, very carefully. We don't know what we're dealing with, and we don't know what consequences our intervention might have."
A week later, the Politburo of the CPSU Central Committee at a closed meeting adopted a resolution on the continuation of special scientific work in Antarctica. The formulations were vague, but the essence was clear. The work received the highest state priority and funding. On the same day, in different parts of the Soviet Union, 6 people received urgent summons. A professor linguist from Leningrad University, a specialist in ancient languages, an archaeologist from the Institute of the History of Material Culture, a theoretical physicist from the Kurchatov Institute, a geologist from the Siberian branch of the Academy of Sciences, and 2 specialists whose names did not appear in any official documents. They were given 1 day to pack and explained the next 2 years they would spend in Antarctica at a secret facility, engaged in work of special state importance. Contact with relatives once a month, strictly by correspondence censored by the security service. Leaving the station premises is prohibited. Disclosure of any information. Article for espionage. All 6 agreed without hesitation, because they were shown 1 photograph, a fragment of that very slab with the writings. And for a true scientist, that was enough. 1 glance at these symbols and they understood. Here begins a discovery that will turn all of science upside down. On August 15, the group flew from Moscow to Antarctica, to where under kilometers of ice waited answers to questions that humanity had not even dared to ask. And in Moscow, in a specially created laboratory under the Institute of Geochemistry, the country's best minds were studying that very metallic sphere. And the more they researched it, the more mysteries it spawned. The X-ray showed, inside, a complex structure, layers, chambers, elements that could be circuits, conductors, accumulators, as if it was not just an object, but a device. And one day, during another experiment, when the sphere was placed in a strong electromagnetic field, it responded. A faint glow, barely noticeable, but the instruments recorded it. Something inside activated for a fraction of a second, and then fell silent again. The head of the laboratory wrote in a classified report that evening, "The object demonstrates signs of primitive artificial intelligence, or an automatic response system,
Further research requires special caution. Activation of the device may lead to unpredictable consequences. And in Antarctica, at Vostok Station, drilling continued, meter by meter, day by day, deeper into the ice thickness, closer to the secret that had waited for its hour for 400,000 years. By early 1962, there were already 30 people at Vostok Station, twice the regular staff. For a polar station, this was on the edge of the possible. Fuel reserves, food, living space. Everything was calculated for fewer people, but the work would not tolerate delay. Drilling of the Vostok 1 well had reached a depth of 2,700 meters. Each meter came with difficulty. At such a depth, the ice became plastic from the pressure of the upper layers. The well tended to close up. It had to be constantly flushed with a special non-freezing fluid, monitor the drill temperature, replace worn equipment parts. But the main task became not just drilling, but studying what was hidden in the depths. For this, a unique instrument was delivered from Moscow, a high-resolution seismic scanner developed in one of the closed institutes. The principle of operation was simple. A sound wave emitter was lowered into the well, which, reflecting off various structures under the ice, created a kind of three-dimensional map. The first scan was conducted in February '62. The results exceeded all expectations, and at the same time raised new questions. Geophysicist Dmitry Volkov sat in front of the oscilloscope screen, watching the graphs of reflected signals. Next to him stood the newly arrived theoretical physicist Boris Petrov, a man with a sharp mind and a reputation as a skeptic, who accepted nothing on faith, without calculations. Look, Volkov pointed to the monitor, here's the boundary between ice and water. Depth, 3,750 meters. Lake Vostok, we know that. But further, the graph showed reflection from the lake bottom, which was at about 4-kilometer depth. However, between the water surface and the bottom, other lines were traced, clear, of regular geometric shapes. This looks like layers, Petrov murmured, but too even for natural formations. He took a compass and began measuring distances on the graph printout. Volkov, this is impossible. Look, the intervals between these lines are identical, 12 meters, like floors of a building. I know, I've seen it. Volkov pulled out another printout, and here's the horizontal scan, what extends sideways from the well. Petrov took the sheet, and his face paled. On the paper, structures were clearly outlined, rectangular, round, connected by lines that could be tunnels or corridors. The scale was staggering. The extent of the objects reached several kilometers. This is a city, the physicist exhaled, an underwater city, or what's left of it. They called Samsonov. The colonel studied the data all night, double-checked the calculations, cross-referenced the maps. By morning, there were no doubts left. Beneath Vostok Station, at the bottom of the ancient subglacial lake, lay the ruins of a grandiose structure. We need to conduct a repeated scan, Samsonov decided. From different points, build a three-dimensional model, understand the scale. The next month was spent on methodical work. The drilling rig stood idle. All efforts were thrown into scanning. The emitter was lowered to different depths, measurements taken at various angles. Gradually, image by image, a picture emerged of what lay in the depths. And this picture was breathtaking. The central structure turned out to be something like a dome or pyramid, about 300 meters high. From it radiated 4 rays, long structures stretching 2 to 3 kilometers. Around the center, a multitude of smaller buildings connected by tunnels, and on the periphery, something that could be a wall or rampart encircling the entire complex. The size is comparable to a large modern city, the architect calculated, specially summoned from Leningrad for consultation. The built-up area is about 15 kilometers. If we assume it was living space, tens of thousands of beings could have inhabited it here. Beings? Samsonov asked back. Not humans? We don't know who they were, the architect shrugged. 400,000 years ago, modern humans did not exist. There were predecessors, archanthropes, possibly early Neanderthals, but they didn't build cities. They could barely use fire. So, not humans, Samsonov said thoughtfully. Then who? No one could answer that question, but new data emerged, even more baffling. Professor Alexander Gorodetsky, a linguist from Leningrad University, had been working on deciphering the symbols from the stone slab. 2 months of painstaking work, comparisons with dozens of ancient scripts, searching for patterns. And at the end of March, he entered Samsonov's office with eyes ablaze. "I've found the key." Or rather, not quite the key, but a hint. This script is based on mathematical principles. The symbols denote not sounds or objects, but concepts, abstract notions. And it has a repeating element. He showed a drawing that appears at the beginning of each line. "I think this is something like a warning or an address. Can you read anything?" Individual fragments. Here, for example, Gorodetsky pointed to a group of symbols. "If my theory is correct, it speaks of a cataclysm, a great change, translating more precisely the time when the sky fell and the earth froze." More precisely, and here about the descent. "We went down, under stone and water, to wait out the end."
And this, he showed a particularly complex sign. This could mean either a repository or a shelter or even a tomb. Samsonov felt chills run down his spine. They knew an ice age was coming and descended underground, built this city under ice or water when Antarctica was not yet frozen, to survive. It seems so, but here's what's strange. Gorodetsky placed another sheet with symbols on the table. At the end of the text, there's another phrase. I translated it with great difficulty, and I'm not sure of the accuracy, but it seems to say, "we wait." Just like that. We wait, in the present tense, if my grammar is correct. They wait. Samsonov frowned. But they should be dead for 400,000 years. I know, it's absurd, but the text is written exactly like that. We wait, or we await. And there's also a word that I can't translate. It appears 3 times and seems to be key. I can translate. He showed a symbol like a circle with rays. This could mean time or cycle or even return. The meaning escapes, but the context is such that when this word comes, we will come out, or awaken. Again, I'm not sure. Silence hung in the barrack. The heating stove hummed monotonously. Outside the window, an Antarctic blizzard raged, hurling snow pellets at the frozen panes. "They await awakening," Samsonov said quietly. "And these radio signals are not random interference. This is a beacon, an automatic system that has worked for hundreds of thousands of years and responds when someone approaches." "Viktor Alexeyevich," Gorodetsky swallowed, what if they are really there? Not dead, not skeletons, but in some anabiosis, cryosleep. I've read science fiction novels where people freeze for centuries, but if this civilization was so advanced that it built a subglacial city, maybe they had such technology too. Samsonov did not answer. He approached the window, looked into the white void of the blizzard. Samsonov did not think about the city under 4 kilometers of ice and water, about the beings who built it, knowing their world was doomed, about the message they left, and about the last phrase, "We wait." Finally, he turned. "Professor, you haven't told anyone about your translation." "No, you forbade it, and continue to remain silent. This concerns everyone." Samsonov took out a cipher message form from the safe. "I will report to Moscow and request permission for the next stage. We need to pass the remaining ice thickness, reach the lake, and descend to this city. See it with our own eyes. Only then will we know the truth." The cipher message was sent to Moscow that same evening. The response came after 2 days, and it was short. "Continue drilling. Prepare equipment for underwater descent. Arrival of an additional group of specialists in May 62. Observe maximum precautions." And a week later, something happened that made them doubt the correctness of the decision to continue the work. That night of April 11, all seismographs at the station simultaneously recorded a jolt,
weak but distinct, coming not from above, but from below, from the depths. Volkov checked the data and felt a chill. The epicenter was exactly where the central domed structure of the ancient city lay, at the bottom of the lake, as if something down there had stirred, awakened, responded to the presence of people above. And that same night, the radio signals changed. They became more complex, more informative, and a pattern could clearly be discerned in them, which could be interpreted in only one way: an attempt at communication. Someone or something was trying to talk to them. The decision to descend to the subglacial city was made at the highest level. In May 1962, in Moscow, in one of the underground bunkers under the building on Frunzenskaya embankment, a narrow circle gathered.
5 people who knew everything about the project: KGB Chairman Shalypin, the Deputy Chairman of the Sovmin, the project's Chief Scientific Consultant, Academician Keldysh, the Chief Designer of Special Equipment, and Colonel Samsonov, who had flown in from Antarctica specifically for this meeting. "Comrades, we stand at a crossroads," Shalypin began. "Continue or stop. The first gives us a chance at the greatest discovery in history. The second guarantees safety, but leaves questions unanswered, and, importantly, leaves the field to others. The Americans are not sleeping, and their station at the South Pole is conducting similar research. If they find out what's hidden under the ice—" "They find out," Samsonov interrupted. "It's a matter of time. Seismic sounding is not our unique technology. Sooner or later, someone else will discover these structures, and then the race will begin. And we have the advantage. We're first. We're already in place. We have a well almost 3,000 meters deep. We're closer to the goal than anyone." "Risks?" Academician Keldysh asked. "Technically high," the chief designer replied. "Descent to a depth of 4 kilometers under the ice. Then immersion into the lake water, sealed for millions of years. Temperature, pressure, complete darkness. Communication will be via cable. Radio doesn't work at such depths. If something goes wrong, help will be impossible." "And biological risks?" the Sovmin representative asked cautiously. "We're talking about a closed ecosystem, isolated from the outside world for hundreds of thousands of years. There could be microorganisms, bacteria, viruses, to which we have no immunity." "We've accounted for that," Samsonov nodded. "Hermetic suits, full isolation. All samples will be placed in sealed containers. Quarantine after return minimum 1 month. Protocols developed jointly with military virologists." "And if there," Keldysh hesitated, "if they're not only ruins, if these beings really wait, as it says in the inscription, if they have survived." A long pause. Everyone looked at Samsonov, preserved. Then the colonel said slowly, "We will become the first people to encounter non-human intelligence. And yes, it's frightening. But it can also be the greatest moment in the history of our civilization. Contact, exchange of knowledge, understanding that we are not alone in the universe, even if this intelligence is earthly, ancient, forgotten. Or it could be a catastrophe," the Sovmin representative noted grimly. "We don't know who they are, what they want, if they are friendly. Remember history. Every time 2 civilizations of different development levels met, it ended badly for the less developed one." "That's why we proceed cautiously," Samsonov objected. "The first descent is reconnaissance, a small group only to the entrance of the structures, photos, video recording, sampling. No attempts to penetrate deeper without data analysis and permission from here." The discussion lasted another 2 hours. In the end, the decision was made. The operation to descend to the subglacial city receives the green light. Codename: Depth City. Timeline: summer of '63, when the polar day will provide maximum daylight for the work. But the most difficult question turned out to be, who will go down? Whom to send on this expedition that might be the last? The selection criteria were strict: impeccable health and physical fitness, experience working in extreme conditions, underwater or underground, psychological resilience to confined spaces and isolation, scientific qualification. Each group member had to be a specialist in their field. And
most importantly, willingness to risk life for knowledge. The search began in July 62. A special commission reviewed dossiers of 300 candidates: polar explorers, divers, speleologists, climbers, military submariners. They conducted medical examinations, psychological tests, stress resistance checks.
One of the first selected was Pavel Gorelov, glaciologist, participant in the first expeditions to Vostok, a man who had spent a total of 5 years in Antarctica at Vostok. He was 38. He was in excellent shape and, most importantly, possessed that rare quality called polar character, the ability to maintain calm and clarity of thought in any circumstances. The second chosen was Northern Fleet diver Igor Kuznetsov, a man who had made dives to record depths for that time, worked under pack ice in the Arctic, knew what pressure, cold, and darkness were like. The third was speleologist Andrei Maximov, a cave explorer who had traversed hundreds of kilometers underground, studied underground lakes in the Urals and Central Asia, a man for whom the underground world was a native element. The fourth was military engineer Sergei Radionov, a specialist in explosives and breaching fortified objects in case they had to overcome rubble or open, sealed entrances. The fifth was microbiologist Nikolai Zavelishin, an expert on extremophiles, organisms living in impossible conditions. His task was to assess biological risks and take samples if life was found in the lake. And the sixth, Colonel Samsonov himself. He insisted on his participation, despite objections. At 45, he was older than the others, and his position as operation chief obliged him to stay above, to coordinate. But Samsonov was adamant. "This is my operation. I've led it from the beginning, and I must see what we're looking for with my own eyes." Preparation began in the fall of 62 and lasted a full year. The group trained at a restricted facility near Gorky, a former mine converted into a training center. There they learned to work in hermetic suits, dive into flooded adits, navigate in the dark, use special equipment. In parallel, designers created equipment for the descent. The main invention was the capsule, a hermetic apparatus for 6 people, capable of withstanding pressure at a depth of 4 kilometers and a temperature of -50 degrees. At depth, the capsule was planned to be lowered down the well on a steel cable, then used as a base for immersion into the lake. For underwater work, special hydro suits with heating and autonomous breathing for 8 hours were developed. Ultra-high-power lanterns, underwater tow vehicles, devices allowing quick movement underwater, cameras for filming, instruments for measurements, weapons. Just in case. In case of what? Kuznetsov asked during one of the briefings when they were issued underwater spear guns and 2 Kalashnikov assault rifles in waterproof cases. "In case of the unknown," the instructor replied evasively. "We don't know what you'll encounter there. Maybe large underwater animals preserved in isolation. Maybe something else." Before departure to Antarctica in October 63, each group member was called in for a session with a psychologist. "Do you understand that this is a one-way trip?" the psychologist asked. "Do you understand in the sense that returning from there may be impossible? The well could collapse, the capsule could get stuck, there could be accidents that no one is insured against. Formally, you die there, and no one will ever know what happened to you. Are you ready for that?" All 6 answered the same. Ready. "Why? What are you risking for?" Gorelov said, "For science. To understand the Earth's past." Kuznetsov, "To go where no one has been. It's like space, but underground." Maximov, "Because I've spent my life descending into caves. This will be the deepest cave." Radionov, "It's an order, and it's important for the motherland." Zavelishin, "Because there might be life like we've never known. To understand it means to understand the very nature of life." Samsonov paused, then said, "Because I must learn the truth, who they were, what happened to them, and what they want from us." Before departure, each wrote letters to their loved ones, sealed with the note, "Open in case." Letters. The letters contained farewells, explanations, requests, and hope that these letters would never have to be delivered. On October 23, 1963, the group flew to Antarctica. With them, they sent 20 tons of equipment, including the descent capsule, packed in a special container. The next 2 months were spent delivering cargo to Vostok Station and preparing for the operation. The well was deepened to 3,700 meters. It remained to pass another 50 meters of ice to the surface of the subglacial lake. The descent was scheduled for December 27th, the height of the polar summer, when the sun does not set for 24 hours and the temperature rises to a warm -35. The day before, Samsonov gathered the group. "Tomorrow we descend. If everything goes according to plan, in 20 hours we will be at the bottom of the lake at the entrance to this city. What we find there no one knows. It may be only ruins. It may be something more. Be prepared for anything. And remember, we work for the future. Be ready so that humanity learns the truth about its past." That night in his barrack, Gorelov wrote in his diary, "Tomorrow we will enter history or disappear into it without a trace." A strange feeling, no fear, only anticipation. As if my whole life I have been preparing for this very moment. And in Moscow, in the closed laboratory that night, they again studied the metallic sphere found in the ice. And this time, when it was placed in an electromagnetic field, it did not just respond, it awoke. A faint but steady glow, a quiet, barely audible hum, and a directed, clear pulse flying off into the distance. Like a signal. Like a message. Like a challenge. The morning of December 27, 1963 turned out to be unusually clear. Temperature -32. Almost warm by Antarctic standards. The sun stood high above the horizon, flooding the snowy plain with blinding light. Ideal conditions for the start of the operation. The capsule was installed over the well a week before the descent. It resembled an enlarged torpedo, 5 meters in length, 1.5 in diameter, with portholes of super strong glass and a hatch in the lower part. Inside, 6 seats, control panel, life support system, radio station, food supplies for 3 days. The 6 people donned special thermal suits. Over them, vests with rescue equipment. On their belts, radios, lanterns, knives, sealed packets with documents, in case they had to leave the capsule in an emergency. Samsonov went around each one, checking the gear, then gathered the group in a circle. "Comrades, this is a historic event. We are the first people to descend to the bottom of a subglacial lake, the first to see what has been hidden from the world for 400,000 years. We act strictly according to plan. No initiative. Connection with the surface every 30 minutes. If something goes wrong, immediate ascent. Clear, clear, Comrade Colonel. So, immediate." At 9 a.m. local time, they took their seats in the capsule. The hatch was sealed. The life support system hummed quietly to life. Samsonov picked up the microphone. "Vostok Base, this is Depth 1. Ready for descent? Depth 1, this is Vostok Base." The station chief's voice came over the speaker. "Descent authorized. Good luck to you. Everyone at the station is watching." The winch engaged. The steel cable tightened. The capsule swayed, then slowly, smoothly, began descending into the well. The first meters passed in semi-darkness. Light from the surface still filtered through the ice. In the portholes, the well walls were visible, white, layered, in places transparent like glass. Gorelov kept the chronometer, recording time and depth every 100 meters. 100 meters. Temperature inside the capsule, +18. Pressure, normal. All systems functioning. 200 meters. Surface light barely penetrates. Activating external lighting. The capsule's floodlights flared, illuminating the ice tunnel. Now the descent turned into a journey through frozen time. Each ice layer was a slice of Earth's history and climate. Here's a layer with volcanic ash, an eruption somewhere in antiquity. Here's a dark streak, a period with lots of dust in the atmosphere. Here's a transparent section, an era of warm climate.
500 meters on schedule. Descent speed 20 meters per minute. It dragged slowly. The capsule was cramped, stuffy, despite the working ventilation. The 6 men silently looked out the portholes or at the instruments. Each thought their own thoughts about what awaited below, about whether they would return. 1,000 meters, Comrade Colonel, look to the right. Samsonov turned his head. In the ice thickness, illuminated by the floodlight, the very chamber they had discovered 3 years ago was visible. Processed walls, void. The place where the slab with writings had once lain, the first proof, Zavalishyn said quietly, the first sign that we weren't mistaken. The descent continued. 1,500 meters, 2,000 meters. Here the ice became darker, denser. The pressure on the well walls was such that it narrowed, and the capsule barely passed, scraping the sides with ice. 2,500, slight vibration, cable taut, continuing. At 2,700 meters, the first incident occurred. The capsule lurched sharply. A crackle came from the speaker. Depth 1, this is Vostok Base. Everything all right with you? Samsonov grabbed the microphone. Strong lurch. What happened? A piece of ice broke off from the well wall and fell on the cable. Checking for damage, cable intact. You may continue, but carefully. Everyone's hearts skipped a beat. A collapse in the well at such a depth could mean disaster. The cable could snap, the capsule could get stuck. But they got lucky this time. 3,000 meters, half the way behind. Now, nothing was visible in the portholes except dark ice. As if they were plunging into antiquity itself, into the depths of time.
The air in the capsule grew heavy. Someone coughed quietly. Someone swallowed. 3,500 meters. Someone. Temperature outside, -53. Inside, +16. The heaters are coping. At a depth of 3,650 meters, the instruments recorded an anomaly. The gravimeter showed a sharp change in the gravitational field, as if a void had opened beneath them. "We're approaching the lake," stated Gorlov. "Another 50 meters. And suddenly in the speaker, not a voice from the base, but that very signal. Rhythmic. Pulsating. The one they had heard in recordings for months, only now it was louder, clearer. Close. "What is it?" asked Kuznetsov. "It's them," answered Samsonov. "They know we're coming." The descent slowed down. The winch worked at minimum speed. Every meter was taken with caution. 3,700. The ice changes structure, becomes loose. 3,720. We see the boundary. Water ahead. And here is the moment that each of the 6 would later recall as the brightest in life. The moment when the capsule emerged from the ice tunnel and hung over the surface of subglacial Lake Vostok. The floodlights illuminated the water. Black. Absolutely black. The lake that hadn't seen light for millions of years. Temperature -3. The water was supercooled, but didn't freeze due to the pressure of the upper ice. "Lord," whispered someone. "We're submerging into the water," commanded Samsonov. "Prepare for pressure change." The capsule slowly descended. Black water covered the portholes. Now around was only darkness, dense, tangible, as if alive. "Turn on all floodlights, maximum power." The light cut through the darkness, but not far. 20 meters at most. Further, nothing again. The capsule slowly descended, the cable unwound from the winch. Immersion depth 50 meters from the lake surface. Water murky. Visibility limited to 100 meters. Water temperature -2. No currents observed. The lake is calm. At a depth of 150 meters, something happened that made everyone freeze.
In the beam of the floodlight, something fast, alive, flashed by.
Did you see that? Zavalishyn pressed to the porthole. Saw? Kuznetsov nodded. Something big, 3 meters no less. There's life there, the microbiologist exhaled. Multicellular life in a closed lake, isolated for millions of years. This is impossible. But it was. In the beams of the floodlights, creatures floated by, semi-transparent, ghostly, similar to jellyfish, but with long tentacles and strange growths. They moved slowly, smoothly, as if in some timeless dance. "Record everything on film," ordered Samsonov. "Zavalishyn, your comments. This is adaptation to complete darkness. They have no eyes. See these appendages? They look like sensory organs reacting to water vibrations. Bioluminescence. Look, they glow. Faintly, but they glow. This is their way of orientation or communication." The capsule continued the descent, passing through the swarm of these strange creatures. Some swam close, touched the hull with tentacles, then swam away. 200 meters close touch, bottom to be close. Instruments show stop. This is not the bottom. "What do you see, Gorilov?" "A structure directly below us, of regular shape. This is it. This is the city." The floodlights illuminated what they had descended here for. A huge wall stretching sideways beyond visibility, built from blocks perfectly fitted to each other, covered with growths, silt, colonies of some organisms, but still recognizable. Man-made. Artificial. Descending along the wall, Samsonov's voice sounded hoarse, looking for the entrance. The capsule moved slowly, illuminating the ancient masonry. The blocks were enormous, 3 meters long each. There was no mortar between them. They held due to precise fitting, a technology used by ancient builders around the world, in Egypt, in South America, in Baalbek. "Comrade Colonel, do you see the opening there?" Indeed, ahead a dark spot was visible. The entrance. An arch, 5 meters high. Behind it, a corridor leading into the depths of the structure. At those meters, we're landing next to the entrance, Samsonov decided.
"Vostok Base, this is Depth 1. We have reached the target. Entrance to the underwater structure discovered. Preparing to exit the capsule." "Depth 1, understood." The voice from the base sounded excited. "How is the crew's condition?" "All good. Beginning the next phase of the operation." The capsule settled on the bottom next to the entrance. A light jolt, and they froze. Now came the most dangerous moment. They had to go outside into the lake water and penetrate inside the ancient city. Donning the hydrosuits took 20 minutes, checking all systems, connections, valves, attaching air tanks, testing radio communication. It worked only over short distances through the water. Activating chest cameras. Everything must be documented. "We exit in pairs," Samsonov announced. "First me and Kuznetsov, then Gorelov and Radionov, Zavalishyn and Maximov last. Stay together. Distance no more than 3 meters. The safety line connects us all. Distance no..." They opened the lower hatch of the capsule. Black water rushed into the airlock chamber. Cold penetrated even through the thick walls of the hydrosuit. Samsonov was the first to dive into the water, turned on the helmet lantern, pushed off from the capsule, and swam toward the entrance to the ancient structure. Behind him, Kuznetsov, then the others. 6 people in bulky suits moved slowly toward the entrance. Their lanterns tore fragments of ancient architecture from the darkness, carvings on the stones, symbols similar to those on the slab, images of beings, incomprehensible, unlike humans. "Entering," Samsonov's voice sounded in the headphones. They swam across the threshold and found themselves inside. The corridor led deeper, descending downward. The walls were smooth, processed with incredible precision. On the sides were niches in which something had once stood, now empty. "Proceed slowly. Examine everything. Record with cameras."
They swam along the corridor for 10 minutes. Silence. Only the sound of their own breathing in the helmet and the hiss of the regulator. And suddenly, a faint bluish light emanating from somewhere inside. "Do you see this?" Maximov asked. "I see," Samsonov replied. "The light source is ahead." They accelerated their movement. The corridor widened and led into a huge hall with a high vaulted ceiling, and in the center a column 20 meters high, glowing, pulsating with soft blue light. "What is this?" Zavelishin whispered. "A power source," Radionov suggested, "still working after hundreds of thousands of years." They swam closer. The column was made of a material resembling metal but transparent. Inside, something moved. Streams of energy, plasma. It was impossible to say exactly. Technology far ahead of everything humanity knew in the 60s. And around the column, in a semicircle, stood they. Figures. 7 figures frozen in rigid poses. Tall, about 2.5 meters, encased in something like spacesuits or protective suits. Their faces were hidden behind transparent visors, behind which features were visible, both human and alien. "My God," Gorelov exhaled. "They are here. They really are here." Samsonov slowly swam up to the nearest figure, shone the lantern behind the visor. A face, elongated, with large eye sockets, thin features, gray skin, like stone. But once this being was alive, intelligent. "These are not humans," Zavelishin whispered. "Different anatomy, proportions, skull structure. This is another species, another branch of evolution." Or he fell silent, not daring to finish. "Or extraterrestrial," Samsonov concluded. And at that moment, the column in the center of the hall flared brightly. The light became blinding. A pulse burst from the column, a wave of energy that passed through the water, through their bodies. And suddenly, in their heads, directly in their consciousness, a voice sounded. Not words, images, pictures. A vision overwhelmed them all at once, as if breaking through the thickness of ages. It was all no hallucination. Too clear, too detailed was what manifested in their minds, as if the ancient city had decided to tell its story. Antarctica, but a completely different one. Green, under a warm sun. Forests, rivers, plains covered in grass, and cities. Majestic cities of white stone rising above the landscape. Towers, domes, bridges, floating platforms in the air. A civilization at the peak of its development. The streets of these cities were traversed by beings, the very ones whose frozen figures stood in the hall. Tall, slender, with large eyes and thin fingers. They wore clothes of shimmering fabric, controlled machines that made no sound, worked with devices resembling holographic screens. This was their planet, their world. They called themselves, a word that didn't translate into human language, but meant something like guardians or observers. They had lived here for millions of years, developed, created a high culture, explored space, penetrated the secrets of matter and energy. But then the vision changed. The sky darkened. The climate began to change. Temperatures fell. Glaciers advanced from the poles. The catastrophe approached inexorably. Despite all their technologies, they knew that ahead lay a long ice age, hundreds of thousands of years, when their continent would turn into an icy desert. Survival on the surface would be impossible. Then they made the decision not to leave the planet. It was impossible for reasons not explained in the vision, but to go underground, under the ice, to build a shelter, a city in the depths, where they could wait out the cataclysm. And they built it, using technologies that allowed them to melt stone, create hermetic spaces, generate energy from the very structure of matter. They descended into underground cavities filled with water from an ancient ocean, erected walls, domes, created a life support system that could work eternally. Thousands of them went into this subglacial city, the last representatives of a fading race. Subglacial. They took with them knowledge, technologies, plant seeds, animal embryos, everything that might be needed to revive the civilization when the ice receded. But something went wrong. The vision became darker, more chaotic. The life support system began to fail. The energy column, their main power source, started working unstably. The people, no, not people, these beings, began dying, one by one.
Their technologies did not withstand the test of time. The last of them gathered in this hall. 7. The last guardians of knowledge. They knew the end was near, and made the final decision. To seal themselves in anabiosis, transfer their consciousness into the energy matrix of the column, wait. Wait until others came, those who could understand, those who could accept the inheritance. They left a message, a warning, and a gift. The vision began to fade, but before disappearing, the last thought imprinted in the consciousness of the 6 people, clear, distinct, addressed directly to them. You have come. You have understood. You are worthy to know. Come. But be careful. What we have left can save your species or destroy it. The choice is yours. The light of the column went out. The hall plunged back into semi-darkness. The 6 people in hydrosuits froze, stunned by what they had seen. The silence lasted a full minute. Finally, Samsonov pulled himself together. Everyone, did you all see this? Yes, Kuznetsov replied hoarsely. I did too, Gorelov confirmed. It was real. I felt it. I was there. Telepathic transmission, Zavelishin murmured. Direct information upload to the brain. Technology we didn't even dream of. What did they mean by the gift? Radionov asked. And by the warning? Samsonov looked around. At the far end of the hall, another passage was visible, closed by a massive door. On the door were the same symbols as on the slab. There, he pointed, the answer. There. They swam up to the door. It was enormous, 10 meters high, 5 wide, made of the same transparent metal as the column. On the edges, grooves were visible, indentations of transparent radionov. The engineer began studying the mechanism. This is a very complex lock, but he shone the lantern on the central panel. There's a round recess here, 3 centimeters in diameter. Samsonov felt a chill. The sphere, the one we found in the ice, is the key. But it's not here, Maximov reminded. It's in Moscow, in the laboratory, so we can't open this door. Mission hour. Samsonov turned to the group. Document everything. Take maximum photos. Collect water samples, growths on the walls, material fragments if possible, and return. We need to report to Moscow and come back here with the key. The next hour, they methodically documented the hall, photographing the column from different angles, filming the 7 frozen figures, their faces, suits, hand positions. Radionov tried to take a sample of the column material, but his tools wouldn't take. The surface was harder than diamond. Zavelishin collected water samples in special containers, harder than diamond. He scraped growths from the walls, colonies of bacteria that had lived here for millions of years. Took a sediment sample from the bottom. Gorelov took measurements, temperature, radiation, magnetic field. All readings were anomalous. The radiation background was below normal, as if something absorbed the radiation. The magnetic field was distorted, swirling around the column. Maximov examined the walls, trying to understand the construction technology. The stones were not just fitted, they were fused together at the molecular level. There were practically no seams. When the work was finished, Samsonov commanded, "Returning to the capsule. We have 3 hours of air left." That's enough to reach the base. They exited the hole, swam back through the corridor. At the exit, Samsonov turned around, shone the lantern once more into the depths of the ancient city. Somewhere there, behind the sealed door, awaited what the Guardians had left for humanity. Knowledge, technology, or something else. Exit into the black water of the lake. A short path to the capsule. They climbed inside, sealed the hatch. Contact with the base. Vostok Base, this is Depth 1. Mission accomplished. Returning. Have critically important information. Depth 1, beginning ascent. Prepare. The winch worked in reverse. The capsule jerked, then smoothly went up. Last glance through the porthole. The ancient city sank into darkness, hiding in the depths of the subglacial lake. The ascent took almost a day, longer than the descent. The winch worked at low speed, fearing to damage the cable. Silence reigned in the capsule. Each processed what they had seen, realized the scale of the discovery. They were the first people to encounter non-human intelligence, even if it had vanished hundreds of thousands of years ago. The first to receive a message from the depths of time, and the first to learn that humanity was not the only intelligent race to appear on Earth. When the capsule finally emerged on the surface, the entire team at the station met them. They opened the hatch. The 6 climbed out, staggering from fatigue. The entire team, but in the eyes of each, burned fire. Samsonov, without wasting time, went to the radio room, closed the door, sat at the table, took a form for an encrypted message, and began writing a report that was supposed to change history. Successful descent to the bottom of Lake Vostok. Underwater structure of artificial origin discovered. Age presumably over 400,000 years. Inside the structure, remains of intelligent beings of non-human species discovered. Operating energy installation of unknown operating principle discovered.
Telepathic message received, transmitted by ancient technology. The message contains the history of the vanished civilization and indications of a sealed repository of their knowledge. To access the repository, an artifact discovered earlier in the ice core is required, the metallic sphere. Requesting permission for a repeat descent with the key. The discovery has extraordinary significance for science, technology, and understanding the planet's history. Immediate decision from the highest leadership required. The cipher went to Moscow. Immediate. The response came after 8 hours. During this time, the 6 participants of the descent underwent medical examination, wrote detailed reports, developed films with photographs. The photographs turned out clear. The hall with the column, 7 figures, the door, symbols on the walls. When these shots were laid out on the table, even skeptics fell silent. It was irrefutable proof. The response from Moscow was brief. Immediately cease all work. Conserve the well. All descent participants prepare for evacuation to Moscow. Arrival of the commission in 3 days. Until their arrival, full isolation regime. No contacts with the outside world. Samsonov read the cipher and frowned. Something went wrong. Why the order to stop work? Why such urgency? The answer came after 3 days, when a plane with the commission from Moscow arrived at the station. The commission included representatives of the KGB, Academy of Sciences, and Ministry of Defense. With them was a general, a man in uniform without insignia, with a hard face and cold eyes. In uniform without. He gathered all operation participants in the largest barrack, closed the door, and said, "Comrades, what you discovered poses a threat to national security, and not only ours, but all of humanity. Therefore, the decision has been made. The project is closed immediately and forever." An oppressive silence hung in the barrack. The general took a folder with documents from his tablet and placed it on the table. "While you were in Antarctica, events occurred in Moscow," he continued. "That very sphere that you found in the ice, in the laboratory they continued to study it. And 3 days ago, at the very moment when you were in the subglacial city, it fully activated." He pulled out a photograph and showed it. In the photo, the laboratory, or rather, what was left of it, destroyed equipment, charred walls, and in the center, the sphere, surrounded by a halo of bright light. An energy release occurred, the general explained. A powerful electromagnetic pulse. All instruments within a 50-meter radius failed. 3 people died, and their hearts simply stopped. Another 5 in the hospital, with severe burns and neurological disorders. Samsonov paled. But how? Why exactly at that moment? "Because the sphere reacted to your presence in the city," the general replied. "It sent a signal, or received a signal, from there. The connection was established over 13,000 kilometers instantly. This means that the ancient technology uses principles that modern physics cannot explain. Quantum entanglement, space-time curvature, we don't know." He pulled out another document, a decryption of the signal that the instruments recorded at the moment of the sphere's activation. "Our cryptography specialists worked on this for 3 days, and here's what they found out. The signal contained information. A lot of information.
Technical diagrams, formulas, blueprints, all of this was encoded in the form of mathematical sequences. The general paused. Among this information were blueprints of weapons. Weapons? Among? Gorelov asked back. A device capable of generating a directed energy pulse of colossal power. According to calculations, one such pulse could vaporize a city the size of Moscow. Radius of destruction tens of kilometers. Penetrating ability through any protection.
And most terrifyingly, the principle of this weapons operation is based on physics that we are only beginning to understand. If we create such a device, he didn't finish. The Cold War will gain a new dimension. The academician from the commission finished for him. Whoever creates such a weapon first will gain absolute superiority. But at the same time, this weapon could destroy all civilization. If both sides gain access to it, mutual destruction is guaranteed. Samsonov slowly realized the scale of the problem. Do you think the Guardians left this specially as a trap? We don't know, the general answered honestly. Maybe it was their weapon that they used. Maybe it was precisely what led to their demise. A weapon that they. And maybe it's a test. They want to know if we are wise enough not to use what they left, or foolish enough to destroy ourselves, as they possibly destroyed themselves. But in the vision, it was said that they perished due to a climactic catastrophe, Zavalishyn objected. The vision might not have shown the whole truth, the academician noted grimly. Or we misinterpreted it. Look at the facts. A highly developed civilization possessing incredible technologies suddenly dies out. Climate is a convenient explanation. But what if there were other reasons? War, technogenic catastrophe, an experiment gone out of control. The general spoke again. Yesterday, an emergency Politburo meeting took place. The question of what to do with the discovery was discussed. Opinions were divided. Some said continue the research, obtain the technologies, get ahead of the West. Others warned of the danger. In the end, the decision was made personally by Comrade Khrushchev. He looked at those gathered. The project is closed. The well is conserved. All materials are classified for 50 years. Access to Lake Vostok is prohibited for any expeditions, ours and foreign ones. But this is the greatest discovery in history, Gorelov couldn't hold back.
We can't just take it and forget about it. We won't forget, the general replied harshly, but we won't use it either. Humanity is not yet ready for such knowledge. We've barely learned to split the atom and immediately created a bomb capable of destroying the world. What will happen if we get technologies thousands of times more powerful? No, too early. Maybe in 100 years, maybe in 200, when people become wiser. If they do. He opened another document. Here's what else our specialists discovered in the transmitted information. A warning. This time textual, translated into mathematical language. I quote verbatim from the translation. We leave this knowledge as a test. The one who finds it must decide, use or reject. We chose to use it, and it led to the end. Reject. Our civilization perished not from the cold. We destroyed ourselves with war, with the weapon they could control. The climatic catastrophe was merely a consequence. We damaged the planet itself, and now wait here, in the depths, hoping that the next intelligent beings will prove wiser. But if you open the sealed repository, you will repeat our mistake. The knowledge there is too dangerous, the power too great. Choose carefully. Absolute silence fell in the barrack. Everyone realized they stood on the threshold of knowledge
that could either elevate humanity to a new level of development or destroy it. Therefore, the general continued, Project Northern Lights is officially closed. All participants sign a non-disclosure agreement for 50 years. Any mention of the discovery is equated to state treason. The sphere will be buried in a special storage facility under the Urals at a depth of 2 kilometers in a lead container. The well at Vostok is filled with non-freezing fluid and sealed. The subglacial lake is declared a closed zone. And what if the Americans find the city themselves? Samsonov asked. They are also conducting research in Antarctica. We're already working on that, the KGB representative replied.
Through diplomatic channels, an international treaty on Antarctica will be initiated, prohibiting military activity, resource extraction, and deep drilling under the pretext of environmental protection. The treaty will be signed next year, and it will include a special clause prohibiting deep drilling near subglacial lakes, ostensibly to avoid disturbing unique ecosystems. So, it wasn't all for nothing, Maximov asked quietly. We risked our lives, descended into the abyss, only to bury it all afterward. It wasn't for nothing, the academician replied firmly. You made the greatest discovery, proved that humanity is not the first intelligent civilization on Earth, that you received a warning from those who walked this path before us, and possibly saved our civilization from repeating their mistake. That's no small thing. That's a great deal. The general stood up. Tomorrow you fly to Moscow, where you'll undergo a full medical examination and psychological rehabilitation. Then you'll be assigned to different regions of the country to minimize the risk of information leaks. Contacts with each other are prohibited. You can only meet at annual closed meetings in Moscow. He surveyed those gathered. You are heroes, but your feat will remain unknown. That's the price of keeping the secret. Do you agree? The 6 descent participants exchanged glances, then one by one nodded. We agree, Comrade General. The next day, they left Vostok Station. The well was flooded with non-freezing kerosene-based fluid. The entry hole was sealed with a concrete plug. A plaque was installed on top. Well number 1 conserved. Access prohibited. The drilling equipment was dismantled and removed. All research materials, diaries, photographs, and records were packed into sealed crates and sent to Moscow to a special KGB storage facility. Vostok Station returned to its routine activities, meteorological observations, climate studies, as if nothing had happened.
But deep under the ice, at the bottom of the ancient lake, the city remained, with its 7 frozen figures, with the energy column continuing to pulse in the darkness, and with the sealed door, behind which knowledge was stored that could change the world. And that knowledge waited. It waited until humanity became wise enough to use it properly, or foolish enough to destroy itself, as the Guardians had once destroyed themselves. 1964, Moscow, Lubyanka. Colonel Viktor Samsonov sat in the office of KGB chairman Vladimir Semichostny, who had replaced Shalypin in the post. On the table lay a folder stamped Top Secret, of special importance, store forever. Folder stamped Viktor Alexeyevich, Semichostny began. You led Operation Northern Lights from the very beginning. You descended into the subglacial city. You saw them. Therefore, I want to hear your personal opinion, not official, but human. Did we do the right thing by closing the project? Samsonov was silent for a long time, choosing his words. Comrade Chairman, I am a military man, accustomed to thinking in terms of threats and defense, and from that perspective, yes, we did the right thing. What is stored behind that door is too dangerous. We struggle to control nuclear weapons, and here we're talking about technologies orders of magnitude more powerful. Imagine, the weapon of the gods falls into our hands.
What will we do with it? Use it for defense or for attack? And what will the Americans do if they find out we have such a weapon? Right, they'll start a race, and that race can end in only one way: mutual destruction. But from a scientific point of view, we missed the opportunity to leap into the future by a century, Samsonov admitted. Energy, medicine, materials science, physics, everything could have changed. But he paused. But I saw them, those guardians. They were smarter than us, more developed. They lived for millions of years while we were still walking on all fours.
And what happened to them? They're dead. Their civilization is destroyed. And their last message is a warning. Do not repeat our mistakes. I think we should heed it. Simichasny nodded. I reported the operation to the Politburo. Khrushchev made the final decision. The project is completely shut down. Department S is disbanded. All employees are transferred to other positions with a ban on mentioning past work. You get a promotion. KGB colonel, head of the department in Leningrad. Quiet work far from Moscow. Do you consider this both a reward and a guarantee of silence? The comrade chairman understood. There's one more question. Simichasny opened the folder. Comrade Chairman, the International Treaty on Antarctica. We managed to include the clause prohibiting deep drilling, but the Americans insist on international scientific cooperation, data exchange, joint expeditions. How do we explain why the Lake Vostok area is closed to research? Ecological considerations, Samsonov suggested, a unique closed ecosystem that could be contaminated upon contact with the surface. Microbiologists will confirm it. There really could be ancient organisms, dangerous to the modern biosphere. It's not a lie. It's the truth. Just not the whole truth. Reasonable. We'll do it that way. A month later, on December 1st, 1959, the Antarctic Treaty was signed in Washington. 12 countries, including the USSR and the USA, pledged to use the continent only for peaceful purposes. Military bases, weapons testing, and burial of radioactive waste were prohibited. And in the treaty's appendix, in the section on environmental protection, a clause appeared. Deep drilling in areas of subglacial lakes must be conducted only with permission from the International Scientific Committee and in compliance with the strictest precautions to avoid contamination of unique ecosystems. This clause effectively closed access to Lake Vostok for decades.
Any attempt to drill a well would require approvals, expert reviews, discussions, and the USSR had solid grounds to block any such attempts. The 6 descent participants dispersed across the country. Gorelov received a position at the Institute of Geography in Moscow, but his work was related to the Arctic, not Antarctica. Kuznetsov returned to the Northern Fleet. Maximov became a lecturer at a mining institute. Radionov became an officer in a closed military town. Zavalishin became an employee of a microbiological laboratory in Siberia. They met once a year, at the end of December, in one of the KGB's closed sanatoriums near Moscow. Once a year, formally for a medical examination. In fact, to maintain contact. Exchange thoughts. Remember what they had experienced together. At the first such meeting, in December '65, Gorelov said, "You know, I still see them in my dreams, those 7. They stand around the column and wait. And every time it seems to me that they are trying to say something important, that we didn't understand then, in the vision." Me too, Zavalishin admitted. And you know what? I think they are still there. Not dead, not alive, in some intermediate state. Their consciousnesses are sealed in the energy matrix. They wait. They wait until we return. Until we mature. Maybe our grandchildren will return there, Maximov said thoughtfully. In 50 years, when the secrecy period expires, maybe by then the world will have become different, more peaceful, wiser. Or maybe not, Radionov noted grimly. Maybe we'll destroy ourselves sooner. Grimly. Nuclear war
ecological catastrophe, pandemic. There are many ways, and then that city will remain there forever, a monument to two perished civilizations. No, Samsonov said firmly, we must not destroy. That's exactly why we closed the project. To give humanity a chance.
A chance to become better, to learn to control its ambitions, to understand that some knowledge is too dangerous for an immature mind. He raised his glass to the Guardians, to their wisdom in warning us, and to the hope that someday we will become worthy of their legacy. To the Guardians, the others repeated. The years passed. The USSR continued its work in Antarctica. Vostok Station functioned, conducting meteorological observations, studying the climate. But the sealed well remained sealed. The plaque, access prohibited, it didn't bother anyone. The polar explorers always had enough other work. Who it didn't bother? Sometimes in the long winter nights, when the temperature dropped to -80 and the wind howled against the barrack walls, the duty radio operators picked up strange signals. Faint, barely discernible, coming as if from under the ground. Rhythmic, ordered, resembling code. They recorded these signals in the log, reported to the station chief. He shrugged. Magnetic storms, interference from equipment, acoustic effects in the ice thickness. There were enough explanations to avoid asking extra questions. But those few who knew the truth understood. It's a beacon, an ancient beacon working for hundreds of thousands of years. It continues to transmit its message into the void, waits for someone to respond, for someone to return. And in Moscow, in the storage deep underground, in a lead sarcophagus lay the sphere, the key to the sealed door, the key to knowledge that could change the world. It no longer glowed, no longer emitted energy. It was silent, sealed in layers of metal and concrete. But sometimes, during strong magnetic storms, the sensors in the storage facility detected faint pulses, as if the sphere was trying to connect with something distant, with the city under the ice, with the column in the ancient hall, with those 7 figures frozen in eternal waiting. The connection was severed, but not forever. Sooner or later, someone would decide to return. Sooner or later, the door would be opened. The only question was whether humanity would be ready by then for what lay behind it. More than 50 years passed. The Soviet Union collapsed. The Cold War ended. The world changed beyond recognition. But Vostok Station continued to operate. In the early 2000s, Russian scientists resumed drilling the well to Lake Vostok, officially to study ancient climate from ice cores. Unofficially, because the declassification period for Project Northern Lights had arrived. On February 5, 2012, the drilling rig at Vostok Station reached the mark of 3,769 meters. The surface of the subglacial lake, the moment they had waited half a century for. But just before breaking through into the lake, the drilling was stopped. The official explanation was the need to sterilize the equipment to avoid contaminating the ancient water. The real reason was different. In Moscow, in the archives of the Federal Security Service, the files of Project Northern Lights were declassified. The documents were read, and horror set in. An emergency meeting was convened. Attendees included representatives from the Russian Academy of Sciences, FSB, and Ministry of Defense. Of the 6 participants in that long-ago descent, only one was still alive. Pavel Gorelov, who was 86 years old. He was specially brought from Moscow so he could recount everything he remembered. The old man spoke for 3 hours, recalling every detail. The descent, the city, the 7 figures, the vision, the warnings. When he finished, silence hung in the hall.
"And you're sure this wasn't a hallucination?" asked one of the young scientists. "Telepathic transmission. An ancient civilization, a weapon capable of destroying a continent. It sounds like science fiction." "We have photographs," the FSB representative replied. "They were classified but preserved. I'll show them now." The images were projected on the screen.
The hall with the column, the 7 figures, the door.
Even through the graininess of the old film, it was clear. This was no natural formation. It was architecture, technology, civilization. "My God," the academician whispered. "It's real. It really exists." "And what are we supposed to do?" the Ministry of Defense representative asked. "Continue drilling. Return there. Open that door?" Gorelov shook his head. "I've lived a long life, seen a lot. The collapse of the USSR, wars, terrorism, ecological crises. And you know what conclusion I've come to? Humanity hasn't become wiser. We're still ready to destroy each other. For money, power, resources. We're still creating weapons that we might turn against ourselves. No, we're not ready. Perhaps we will never be ready. Therefore, my advice, leave the city in peace. Do not open that door. Let the Guardian's knowledge remain sealed until we learn to live in peace with ourselves." His words had an effect. The decision was made. Stop drilling at the current depth, do not break through to the lake, do not descend to the city. Announce that signs of potentially dangerous microorganisms have been detected, and for the safety of the biosphere, the work is suspended. The international scientific community accepted this decision. There were no protests. The risk of biological contamination was too great, but rumors had already begun to spread. Articles about the secrets of Lake Vostok appeared on the internet. Bloggers built theories about subglacial civilizations. Ufologists talked about alien bases. The more the authorities remained silent, the more the conspiracy theories proliferated. And in 2019, something happened that changed everything. A group of hackers hacked into the server of the Russian Scientific Institute and leaked part of the declassified documents of Project Northern Lights to the network. Not all. The most secret files were too well protected, but enough for the world to learn.
Something incredible is hidden under the Antarctic ice. Photographs of the subglacial city went viral around the world. The media exploded. Scientists demanded an immediate international expedition. Russian authorities denied the authenticity of the documents, spoke of forgeries, but the genie was out of the bottle. The Americans announced plans to send their own expedition to Lake Vostok. The Chinese did too. A new race was beginning, just like in the 60s. And then Russia made an unexpected move. In 2021, the president of the Russian Federation made an official statement. "I confirm that an artificial structure has been discovered under Vostok Station in Antarctica, presumably hundreds of thousands of years old. This is the greatest archaeological discovery in history, but at the same time, it is a zone of potential danger. According to declassified documents, there may be technology there whose use threatens the safety of the planet. Therefore, I propose that all countries participating in the Antarctic Treaty adopt a moratorium on any research in the Lake Vostok area for 25 years. During this time, create an international commission to develop safety protocols. And only after that, if the commission deems it safe, permit access to the subglacial city." The proposal was revolutionary. Recognizing the existence of an ancient civilization meant rewriting all of human history, but imposing a moratorium at the same time meant demonstrating wisdom and caution. Debates at the UN lasted 2 years. Countries argued, bargained, put forward conditions, but in the end, in 2023, the moratorium was adopted for 25 years until 2048. And now, in 2025, the world lives with this knowledge. Beneath the Antarctic ice,
The city of the ancient guardians waits. The column with their consciousnesses waits. The sealed door waits. Awaits the decision. Will we open this door or leave it closed forever? Vostok Station continues to operate.
Scientists conduct meteorological observations, study the climate, take samples of snow and ice. Life goes on as usual. But sometimes, in the dead of the polar night, when the thermometer shows -90 and it seems you're at the edge of the world, the radio operators pick up those very signals, faint, rhythmic, coming from the depths. The beacon continues to work. The Guardians continue to wait. They wait until humanity becomes wise enough to accept their gift or cautious enough to refuse it. Epilogue. The secret remains. Today, in 2025, we stand on the threshold of the greatest enigma in human history. Beneath 4 kilometers of Antarctic ice, at the bottom of an ancient lake, lies hidden a city built hundreds of thousands of years ago by a race of intelligent beings who vanished long before the appearance of Homo sapiens. What do we know for sure? First, subglacial Lake Vostok exists. This is a scientific fact, confirmed by seismic sounding. The lake has an area of about 15,000 square kilometers and a depth of up to 1,000 meters. It has been isolated from the outside world for about 15 million years. Second, there is life in the lake. Water samples taken by Russian scientists in 2012 showed the presence of bacteria unknown to science. This means that even in complete darkness and isolation, life finds a way to exist. Third, anomalies have indeed been recorded at the bottom of the lake. Geophysical studies show structures of regular geometric shapes. Official science explains them as unusual geological formations. But those who have seen the declassified photographs know, these are not stones. This is architecture. What do we not know? Who built this city? Architect.
Where did the Guardians come from? Were they an earthly race that developed long before us? Or guests from other planets who settled on Earth millions of years ago? What caused their demise? A climactic catastrophe, as one version says? Or war, self-destruction, as the other warns? What lies behind the sealed door? A library of knowledge? Technological blueprints? Weapons of mass destruction? Or something entirely different that we can't even imagine? And the most important question, what will happen if we open this door? Pavel Gorelov, the last living witness to the 1963 descent, is today in a nursing home near Moscow. He is 88 years old. He is in poor health, but his mind is still sharp. Sometimes journalists and researchers visit him, trying to learn the details. The old man tells the same thing over and over. I saw them. They were real, they were intelligent, and they left us a choice. We can open the door, gain their knowledge, their technologies, become gods, open the door. Or we can leave the door closed, acknowledge that some knowledge is too dangerous, that wisdom is not in accumulating power, but in the ability to refuse it. And what would you advise, they ask him. Gorelov smiles. I'm an old man. I don't have much time left. Soon I'll die and take with me everything I saw. But before I die, I want to say one thing. The future is yours, the young ones. It's up to you to decide, up to you to live with the consequences. And you know what? I believe in you. I believe that you'll make the right decision when the time comes. The time is indeed approaching. In 23 years, the moratorium on Lake Vostok research will expire. The International Commission is already working on safety protocols. A new expedition is being prepared. Equipment for the descent is being developed.
And someday, perhaps within the lifetime of the current generation, people will descend again into the subglacial city, walk the corridors built hundreds of thousands of years ago, enter the hall with the energy column, see the 7 frozen figures of the Guardians, and before them will stand the choice to open the sealed door or not. Behind the door lies knowledge, power, the possibility to change the world, but also risk, danger, the repetition of the ancients' mistake. What will humanity choose? Wisdom or hubris? Caution or curiosity? The answer to this question is not yet written. History continues,
and each of us is part of this history. Perhaps, beneath the thickness of Antarctic ice, secrets are still stored that could upend our understanding of Earth's past. And maybe our scientists are right when they say, humanity is not yet ready to know the whole truth. But someday, in 10, 20, 50 years, we will be ready. And then the door will open, and we will learn who we really are, where we came from, and where we are going. Until then, the secret remains deep under the ice, in the eternal darkness of the ancient lake, in the city that waits. Wait until we become worthy of its secrets.